I think leaders owe their employees a simple plan. Because if you want your employees to really be a part of an effort to grow your company rather than just showing up for the job, then you have to be able to answer a very simple question, the kind of question that kids ask their parents as they set off on a journey, which is, where are we going and how are we going to get there? This, to me, is the leader's job, to answer that question, to explain to people what the goals and priorities are. And there shouldn't be more than 3 of them. Because if you stick your nose in some neuroscience books, you'll always read that most people can't remember more than 3 things day to day. And I think it was Jim Collins who said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have priorities. And you need to make them measurable goals so that people can track your progress and celebrate wins along the way. Because here's the thing, I think people really do want to contribute. I think we're wired that way as human beings. But it's a leader's job to provide that simple scoreboard so they can see how the team is doing and they can understand how the work they're doing contributes to those goals. Just like all of your families have values, whether they're spoken or unspoken, or countries have values which are reflected in their constitution, some founding document. And I think it's true of every company as well. It's essentially a way of defining what you believe in, what behaviors are particularly important to you. The tricky thing about a lot of values, though, is a lot of leaders don't even want to have a discussion. Because we can all imagine that episode of The Office where Michael Scott hires a consultant to come in to do a values exercise, right? And they put stuff on the board and they come up with some miraculous formula about excellence, integrity, and service, right? We can all imagine that. So that's why I think a lot of people don't really want to engage in discussion of values. It's easier just to let it happen on its own. But it is important to talk about what behaviors are important and why. And as this one CEO said, the culture is almost like a religion. People buy into it, he said, and they believe it. And you can tolerate a little bit of heresy, but not a lot. And I am going to give a shout out to the rule of 3 again in the context of values. I often ask the CEOs during my interview with them about their culture and have they codified values, and they say yes. I say, I'd love to hear what they are. And they might say, well, we have 7, or we have 8, or 10, or 15. And when they say that, I make a silent bet with myself. And the silent bet, which I almost always win, is that they won't be able to remember them all. It's remarkable, right? The CEO can't remember their own values. I had one CEO had to go into his briefcase to fish out his iPhone to look up his own company's values. It's a pretty stark reminder that most people can't remember more than 3 things. Maybe 4, sometimes an acronym helps, or an advertising jingle can really help, right? 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, we all know that. If you're going to have an effective culture, if you want people to bring their best self to work every day, and I love that expression, it comes up a lot in my interviews with CEOs, you want people to bring their best self to work every day, then you have to treat them with a little respect. Quick show of hands, how many of you over the course of your life have been dissed or humiliated by a boss in front of your colleagues? I'm going to put up 2 hands because it happened to me plenty. Now, if you folks are like me, you can remember that moment like it was yesterday. And there's a reason for that. Again, we can turn to the field of neuroscience. Because it turns out that if you're treated badly by a boss, particularly in front of others, it fires up the same part of your brain as physical pain. That's why so many of the CEOs I've interviewed use the phrase scar tissue when they tell me about some experience early in their life when they had a really bad boss. And they said, because of that, because of the way I was treated, I will never treat people that way when I become a boss. And they always talk about it in terms of scar tissue. So it is like physical pain, but it's worse. Because with physical pain, you tend to forget it over time. But as this neuroscience expert says, if your boss disses you in front of a team, every time you remember that, you can feel that pain again. You can relive that moment. So that's scar tissue. So you're not going to get people to bring their best selves to work if they come into work in a kind of defensive crouch, worrying that if they stick their hand up in a meeting to suggest some out-of-the-box idea, that they're going to be humiliated. You have to create an environment where people are treated with respect. And the best, simplest way I've come across to create that culture is with this expression, MRI. It's not a medical equipment acronym in this context. What it stands for is most respectful interpretation. And to me, it's just a great shorthand for how a culture should operate. And what this means is that if somebody says something or doesn't do something, that you don't immediately assume that, well, they don't get it or they're just angry because they didn't get that last promotion. You assume the most respectful interpretation. So the other part of the equation is what I call, it's about the team. And this means you have to play your position on the team, and you're going to be held accountable for playing your position. And I think email is a huge problem. It was invented as this wonderful productivity and communication tool, but I think it is just horrible for communication, and it's really damaging to corporate culture. One metaphor I've started thinking of in the context of corporate culture is that culture is kind of like cholesterol, right? You're going to have it one way or another, and it's going to be some mix of good and bad, just like with cholesterol. And so your job as leaders is to sort of push up the good cholesterol and push down the bad cholesterol.